Good morning. I'm so glad Stacy's here. So glad all of you are here. Not singling anyone out. Well, I kind of am. I don't know if you know this. Stacy is amazing, but she has one fault. I know. I'm gonna get in trouble. No, I don't know if you know this about her, but Stacy's a Cowboys fan. I know. And this week, I don't know if you know it, the Cowboys and the Saints had a match, had a game. That's what they say. I mean, I was just saying earlier, they said they cheated, okay? Said they had a guy with a headset looking over Sean Payton's shoulder telling him the plays. So we're still looking into it. We'll confirm it next week. See? Yeah, they did something. There's no way. There's the Deflategate too. But man, I really believe the Saints were going to win that game. I did. I mean, going into it, the Saints on a 10-game win streak. The Cowboys, I mean, they're the Cowboys, right? They're never any good. I really believed they were going to win, much like many of you probably believe the Chiefs are going to win tonight. I mean, the Chiefs, 9-2, are playing the Raiders, who are 2-9. I mean, come on. Let's be honest. It's hard to believe that the Chiefs will lose that game. It is. It's hard to believe that the Raiders could pull that one off. I'm not going to try to jinx it. That's not what I'm trying to do.
Stranger things have happened.
They have, like the Cowboys beating the Saints. No, but some things this morning are hard to believe, right? I mean, there are some things that are hard to believe. I was reading, I guess, there was this England explorer who had went to Australia for the first time. And he was exploring Australia. And I don't know if you know this, but they have weird animals in Australia. They do. They're neat, they're cool, but they're weird. And so this England explorer came back and he said, hey, they have mammals that lay eggs. Mammals that lay eggs. It's like, no, you're lying. We don't believe you. And he said, no, they got this thing. It has these webbed feet and this bill like a duck, and it lays eggs. And they're talking about the platypus, and they said, this mammal lays eggs. And they're like, you're crazy. You're making this up. You're just trying to pull our leg. And no one believed them. And so they go back on a second trip, and they actually get one of the eggs, and they bring it back, and they're like, no, look at this. Like when it hatches, look, this is a mammal hatching from an egg. And they say, oh, we can't believe that. You I don't know what you did, but you worked this. This is some kind of elaborate hoax. There are some things that are hard to believe. I mean, if someone just comes up to you and tells you some crazy statements, there are some things this morning that are hard to believe. But that's what we're talking about this week, is believing. So we've been in this series, Getting the Game. We're looking at things that we need to start doing, right? That we need to start praying, to start giving, and today we need to start believing, even though some things are hard to believe. I do want to finish this series strong. I really do. I want to finish this with this great message of believing, because I really think this is important this morning. But can we do something a little bit different? Please, can we do it a little? First of all, I know it's been a long Sunday. We had breakfast and we had elections, and it's kind of been long. So I'll try not to stay up here too long. If you'll do me a favor, I want you to just kind of get loud, to kind of interact with me. Let's study this together, okay? Let's get some energy this morning, and in return, I'll try not to go too long this morning. We'll work together. But also, I want to do something a little different. I want to start this morning by looking at the same text that we looked at last week. If you were here last week, we looked at the story of the rich young ruler in Matthew chapter 19. And that's where we stayed for a lot of our lesson last week. And today, I want to start there. We're going to then jump to John chapter 11, but I want to start in that same text in Matthew. So if you were here last week, you kind of know what's going on. This man comes to Jesus and he says, how do I inherit eternal life? He has a little cocky smile on his face, thinking he's probably done everything he's supposed to. Jesus says, well, keep these commandments. And he says, I've done those, check, check, check. And Jesus says, okay, well, go and sell everything you have. And then says he walked away sad. And then we said, we don't know how the story ends. We didn't know if he walked away sad and sold everything, or if he walked away and never came back. We don't know how the story ends. But we do see what the disciples say. In verse 25 of Matthew chapter 19, it says, when the disciples heard this, they were greatly astonished and asked, who then can be saved? Jesus looked at them and he said, with man, this is impossible. But with God, all things are possible. With God, all things are possible. Do you believe that this morning? Do you believe that this morning? There are some things, though, that are hard to believe, right? So Jesus, he says this after he gets done telling the people, hey, it's going to be easier for a camel. You know, camels are pretty big. He says it's going to be easy for a camel to walk through the eye of a needle than for this person to be saved. That's pretty hard, isn't it? But then he turns around and he says, but with me, he can be saved. But with me, it's possible. Man, some things are hard to believe this morning. See, with man, it's impossible for some people to be saved. Honestly, with man, it's impossible for any of us to be saved. We're not saved because of our own righteousness. We're not saved because of something we do. It's impossible for us to be saved without God. It's impossible. This morning when we talk about believing, I want to ask you a question. Do you believe in the grace of God this morning? Amen. Do you believe in the grace of God? Do you really believe what the grace of Christ can do? C.S. Lewis puts it this way. I love the way he illustrated it. He got a rope. Luckily, we used this a while back, so I had a rope laying back here. Let's pretend that this rope, when I opened it, the packaging rated it at 500 pounds, okay? So this rope, it says, can hold up to 500 pounds. Would you believe that this morning? I mean, if it said it on the package, pretend it looked a little stronger than it does. So it's rated for 500 pounds. So I could probably, let's also pretend that I have like an imaginary beam right here. So would you believe that I could tie this rope to the beam and then tie it to our chair? Would you believe that the beam could hold the chair? Yeah, depends on how good of a tire I am. No, but yeah, we would believe that sure, that rope that's rated for 500 pounds could hold that chair up. Okay, well, I got another question for you. Let me put my chair back. Let's say this piano over here. Now, this piano probably weighs 300 or 400 pounds, right? It's probably under 500. Would you believe that if I tied this rope to that piano, the rope that's rated to be able to hold that, and tied it up here, and just left it dangling, would you believe that it could hold it enough that you'd come sleep under it? I'm just asking, would you have enough faith in this rope to sleep under that piano if it's dangling down? I wouldn't. And his point, what C.S. Lewis says after this is, you find out what you really believe when it becomes a matter of life and death. I mean, if you're putting your faith in that rope, I mean, if something goes wrong, that quite possibly is going to kill you when that piano falls on you. When something is a matter of life and death, you find out what you believe. This morning, I think believing in the grace of God is a matter of life and death. I think believing in the grace of God is a matter of life and death. And I want to look at a story that I think can really speak to that this morning. I want to look at John chapter 11. In John chapter 11, there is a man that is dying. There is death approaching. In John chapter 11, we see this as a matter of life and death. So we're just going to read this story. It says, now a man named Lazarus was sick. He was from Bethany, the village of Mary, and her sister Martha. John tells us this Mary, whose brother was Lazarus, now lay sick, was the same one who poured perfume on the Lord and wiped his feet with her hair. So the sisters sent word to Jesus, Lord, the one you love is sick. Heard this, Jesus said, this sickness will not end in death. No, it is for God's glory, so that God's Son may be glorified through it. Now Jesus loved Martha and her sister and Lazarus. So when he heard that Lazarus was sick, he stayed there 2 more days. He heard his friend was sick, and he just stayed where he was. And then he said to his disciples, "Let us go back to Judea." "But Rabbi," they said, "a short while ago the Jews there tried to stone you, and you're wanting to go back?" You see what they believe. Jesus answered, "Are there not 12 hours of daylight? Anyone who walks in the daytime will not stumble, for they see by this world's light. It is when a person walks at night that they stumble, for they have no light." After he said this, he went on to tell them, he said, "Our friend Lazarus has fallen asleep. I'm going to go there and wake him up." His disciples replied, and the disciples, they're just as clueless as we are sometimes. His disciples replied, "What if he sleeps? He'll get better." Jesus has been speaking of his death, and his disciples thought that he meant natural sleep. So then Jesus told him plainly, he said, "Lazarus is dead." He said, "The man is dead. And for your sake, I'm glad I wasn't there, so that you may believe. But let us go to him." Then Thomas, also known as Didymus, said to the rest of the disciples, "Let us go, that we may die there with him." Now, what are they thinking? They're thinking they're going to get there and Jesus is going to get stoned and die. And look what they believe. On his arrival, Jesus found that Lazarus has already been in the tomb for 4 days. He's already been buried. Now, Bethany was less than 2 miles from Jerusalem. Many Jews had come to Martha and Mary to comfort them in the loss of their brother. When Martha heard that Jesus was coming, she went out to meet him. But Mary stayed at home. "Lord," Martha said, "if you had been here, my brother would not have died." Look what she believes. She says, "If you were here a little bit sooner, he wouldn't have died. But I know that even now God will give you whatever you ask." Jesus said to her, "Your brother will rise again." Martha answered, "I know he will, in the resurrection at the last day." Jesus said to her, "I am the resurrection and the life. The one who believes in me will live even though they die. Whoever lives believing in me will never die. Do you believe this?" What do you believe this morning? "Yes, Lord," she replied. "I believe that you are the Messiah, the Son of God, who has come into the world." After she said this, she went back and called her sister Mary aside. "The teacher is here," she said, "and is asking for you." When Mary heard this, she got up quickly and went to him. Now Jesus had not entered the village, but was still in the place where Martha had met him. When the Jews who had been with Mary in the house comforting her noticed how quickly she got up and went out, they followed her, supposing that she was going to the tomb to mourn. See what they believed. When Mary reached the place where Jesus was and saw him, she fell at his feet and she said, "Lord, if you had been here, my brother wouldn't have died. Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died." When Jesus saw her weeping, and the Jews who had come along with her also weeping, he was deeply moved in spirit and troubled. "Where have you laid him?" he asked. "Come and see," they replied. Jesus wept. Then the Jews said, "See how he loved him?" But some of them said, "Could not he who opened the eyes of the blind man have kept this man from dying?" Jesus, once more deeply moved, came to the tomb. It was a cave with the stone laid across the entrance. "Take away the stone," he said. "But Lord," said Martha, the sister of the dead man, "by this time there's a bad odor. He's been buried 4 days." Then Jesus said, "Did I not tell you that if you believe, you will see the glory of God?" So he took away the stone. Jesus looked up and said, "Father, I thank you that you have heard me. I knew that you always hear me, but I said this for the benefit of the people standing here, that they may believe that you sent me." When he had said this, Jesus called in a loud voice, "Lazarus, come out." The dead man came out, his hands and feet wrapped up with strips of linen and a cloth around his face. Jesus said to them, "Take off the grave clothes and let him go." It's a good story. This morning, though, remember what I told you? Some things are hard to believe. Amen? Some things are hard to believe. We talked about it in our prayer list a minute ago. George Bush died on Friday, right? 94 years old, he passed away. If I were to get up here and say, "Oh, wait a minute, I just got a notification on my phone. George Bush just rose back to life." Would you believe me? Probably not. Some things are hard to believe. But that's the story that we just read. A dead man coming back to life. That's what's happening here in this story. Jesus is raising a man from the dead. But this was too hard to believe for some people. Martha thought it was too late. She went and said, if you had been here earlier, this wouldn't have happened. You're too late now. I believed you probably had the power to keep him from dying, but now you've showed up after he's dead. You're too late. It's too hard for me to believe that you could do something about it now. The Jews, they didn't believe. I want to ask you a question. Do you think it's too late for Jesus this morning? Do you think it's too late for Jesus this morning? Are you in the mindset that Jesus, if you had been there when it happened, maybe you could have fixed it, but now I'm too far gone? Lord, I love it because I think we do the same thing Martha did. How many times do we say, Lord, where were you? Lord, if you were there when I got sick, Lord, if you were there when so-and-so passed away, Lord, if you were there then, maybe we could have done something about it. But Lord, you're too late. It's too late. Lord, if you had been there to stop me from that terrible sin, Lord, now it's too late. Now I'm too far gone. This morning, do you think it's too late for Jesus? Do you think you're too far gone? I like the brutal honesty in verse 39. You see what Martha says in verse 39? She says, he stinks. She said, he's been in the grave for 4 days. Could you imagine? Could you imagine how that would have smelled? So back then in Jesus' time, they had different ways of preserving bodies and perfume and wrapping it up and whatnot. It wasn't as good as what we do now, but they had certain ways. But still, after 4 days in a closed tomb, could you imagine what this body would have smelled like? And Jesus goes and he says, open it up. They said, are you sure you want to? It's gonna stink. It stinks in there. You know what? Someone ever told you stink? Someone ever told you that your sin and your filth has covered you? Has anyone ever turned up their nose at you and said, you stink too bad? You're too far gone. You've been in the tomb for 4 days already. You're too far gone. That's what they're telling Jesus. They said, listen, he's already starting to smell. He's already starting to rot. You can't go in that. You can't do anything about it now. Have people told you that this morning? Have people told you, listen, you're already too far gone. You've already been in that life for 4 days now, for 4 years, for 4 decades. You've already started to stink. You've already started to smell like the world. You've already started to look like your sin. Have people turned up your nose this morning and said it's too late? At this point in the story, look what Jesus said. He said, believe. He had them take away the stone, walk in, and wake up a dead man. Things are hard to believe, aren't they? I want you, if anyone's ever told you it's too late, if anyone ever told you it's too late for you, if anyone ever has told you you stink too bad, you've been in it too long, I want you to stop believing that garbage and start believing in the grace of God this morning. Start believing in the grace of God this morning, because it was the grace of God that raised Lazarus from the dead. It was the grace that can raise you this morning. Look at why Jesus did this. It says in verses 35 and 36. In 35 it says Jesus wept. In 36 the Jews said, see how he loved him. Why did Jesus raise Lazarus? Because he loved him. This morning, the grace of God and the love of Jesus can raise you. He comes and offers you life and grace. Because the truth is, this morning you're dead too. We all are. And we stink. Do me a favor, turn to your neighbor and say, you stink. Turn to your neighbor and say, you stink. Did you shower this morning? This morning, your sin makes you filthy. Your sin makes you stink. It makes you rot away. You're rotting away in sin. Just like Lazarus, you're dead this morning. Look around. There's dead people sitting in our pews. We are dead in our sin. and we lie helpless in a tomb, just stinking up the place. Ephesians 2 says you were dead in your trespasses and sin. Colossians chapter 2, Paul writes, you were dead in your trespasses, the uncircumcision of your flesh, but God made you alive together with him, having forgiven us all our trespasses by canceling the record of debt that stood against us with its legal demands. He set it aside, nailing it to the cross. I'll tell you something. The grace of God is real this morning. It may be hard to believe. Some things are. But the grace of God is real this morning. And this morning, I want you to start believing that the grace of God can save you. The grace of God can save you. It can raise you from the dead. Did you notice that when Jesus went into that tomb, he didn't tell Lazarus, if you roll over on the left side of your body and look at me just right, then I'll save you. Jesus walked into that tomb and he said, I love Lazarus. This is the man that I love. I'm going to show him grace and raise him. Let him raise you to new life this morning. Stop believing that it's too late. Stop listening to people tell you that you stink too bad or you've been too far gone. Stop listening to that. Let Jesus walk into your tomb this morning and raise you up. Believe that he can. Believe that the love and grace of Jesus Christ can save you this morning. Roll away whatever stone has trapped you in. Whatever that sin is that's blocking you in the tomb, let Jesus come and roll it away and walk in and save you from that. Because the grace of God is a real thing this morning, and I want you to start believing that. Charles Spurgeon, one of my favorite preachers of all time, he once claimed that 98% of the people that he met, including criminals that he visited in England's prisons, he said 98% of people told him they believed the Bible to be true. He said, but the vast majority never made it a personal, life-changing commitment to follow Jesus. He said, for them, believe was not a verb. Believe was not a verb. It wasn't an action. This morning, your belief should be. Believing in the grace of God should change you this morning. Believing in the grace of God should change you. It should change the way you think. Stop thinking about all of your faults and failures and flaws. Start thinking of the blood of Jesus. It should change the way that you see this morning. When you look at other people, stop picking them apart. Stop telling them all of their sins. Stop telling them they stink. Start looking at them and see the blood of Jesus. This morning, it should change the way you feel. Stop feeling so much guilt. Stop sitting and feeling sorry for yourself for the stench. And instead, hear God say, I got you covered. My blood makes you righteous. This should change the way that we live. We should live full of grace. This morning, some things are hard to believe. And to believe that God offers us such undeserved grace is one of the hardest things to believe. Because we know we don't deserve it. But when we accept it, when we accept Jesus' offer of salvation, when we let him walk into our tomb and raise us to new life, it will change us this morning. I don't know where you're at, but as we close this morning, if you've never rolled away the stone and let Jesus come and bring you new life, please do that. If you've done it, but then maybe you started to kind of build your stone back up. Maybe you let Jesus come in and then you kind of started to block him back out. Tear it all down this morning. Let Jesus come back in. Start believing again. Maybe you used to know the grace of God and now you kind of got away from it. Realize this morning the grace of God can save you wherever you're at.